So my name's Drewitt and I'm a freelance naturalist and broadcaster, and so I spend my life really showing people wildlife, going abroad to show people nature, but also here in the UK taking people out to hear bird song and see wildlife. And as part of that, I've also been studying urban peregrines for the last 20 years, and a lot of my kind of engagement with people has been about peregrines. Peregrine falcons are originally a bird that we associated with the countryside, and as their numbers have been increasing over the last 30 or 40 years or so, they love cities because you've got buildings, and buildings replicate the sort of quarries and caves and cliffs that they would have always have used really along the coast and in places like Wales and Scotland. So for peregrines, you've got saturation in the countryside with all the nest sites taken up, and so really cities and towns are the next best thing, and of course there's plenty of food for them as well. So I first got into peregrines when I was 18 years old, and I came to Bristol, to university, and suddenly realised that there were peregrines here in Bristol. And I'd come from the southeast of England originally, where we didn't really have any urban peregrines. So that was on its own right really fascinating. But then I suddenly realised they were eating some really amazing things. And during my childhood, I'd always collected the feathers and skulls of different sorts of birds. And I suddenly had this opportunity to collect new skulls and new feathers that I'd never had the chance to have before. So it was a mixture of the two. It was a mixture of this, wow, this rare bird being in the city centre, but also, wow, they're also eating some incredible things that I can collect and find more about. And from then I started to realise that actually there was some really interesting behaviour going on with the peregrines, which, well, here we are 20 years later, I'm still looking at them all these years on. The first prey species we collected, it was down in Broadmead in the centre of Bristol, and it was the remains of fieldfare, lapwing, redwing, and also golden plover. And I can remember, I've got a photograph of them laid out on newspaper in my halls of residence, my room in my halls of residence, because I just couldn't believe what the peregrines have been eating. So that was my first sort of record and what sort of got me hooked really. So for me, the kind of question was, well, how are they doing that? And 20 years later, I think, we don't know 100% how they're getting some things like golden plover and teal. They're either getting them as those birds are flying over the city, or the peregrines are venturing out in the countryside and getting them that way. But what my research has shown is that the peregrines are certainly catching some of these birds at night in the city. So as some birds like woodcock and little grebe water rail, these are all kind of secretive birds that live on water, in reed beds, in woodland. As they're migrating over the city of Bristol at night, their pale bellies shine up with the light from the street lamps, and the peregrines can see those as kind of like flying beacons. And the peregrines, instead of stoop diving at them, which is what they normally do, they fly up to the prey and grab them and bring them back. I think people have such a bond with raptors because they are these powerful birds. They've got a hooked beak, these amazingly kind of glaring eyes that often have bright orange or bright yellow, the talons. It's a bit like people loving, the big cats like cheetahs and lions. It's these sexy birds that have, all this kind of manner of a predator. So I was on the Avon Gorge one afternoon, and there was suddenly this amazing swooshing sound right past me, and this female peregrine had literally flown right past me at great gusto and speed, and she flew right across the Avon Gorge, and unbeknown to me there was a feral pigeon, and this female came straight in and got this feral pigeon and pinned it down and killed it and then plucked it a little bit and then took it to a cache site, a little fridge freezer, a little hole in the caves in the Avon Gorge. And I always remember that, because although I don't necessarily stand for hours watching peregrines, watching these stoop dives, it was the fact that I was just there at the right place at the right time, and this peregrine just came swooshing past. And for me, that's a very memorable moment that sticks with me, and that was about sort of 12, 13 years ago. I think the more we sort of learn about these birds, the better understanding we have of them. But I think also, peregrines have had ups and downs over the last 100 years. They were shot, they've been poisoned, but also they declined significantly because of pesticides that were used in the countryside and got into their system and caused them to lay very thin eggshells that broke under their weight. Well, they are increasing now in parts of southern England, and it's important we know more about them, so that if they do show declines again, well, actually, if we know more about them, we've got a better understanding of perhaps what's going wrong or why it's going wrong and things like that. But it is still a worrying trend, and certainly rather than seeing a decline in illegal persecution of raptors, we're seeing a continual kind of increase and highish level of it. So it certainly does need to be tackled. It needs to be tackled very diplomatically. It needs to be tackled with lots of people coming together. And the problem at the moment is you have lots of people on opposite ends of the spectrum kind of catfighting, and unfortunately that's not that doesn't help with the situation. It doesn't solve the kind of situations. It just makes people more and more polarised. To help raptors and what have you, I think it's very much about eyes and ears, really. In an urban city like Bristol, it's about watching the birds, enjoying them, but obviously, you know, if during the breeding season the young peregrine on the ground, it's about being in touch with the local organisations like the Hawk and Owl Trust or the RSPB, who can give advice on what's happening. If it's the bigger picture, for example, in the north of England, and you're out walking on moorland, it's about eyes and ears of seeing what's going on, and if you suspect there's something going on that isn't right, contacting the police, of course. So it's eyes and ears, watching out, and talking to the right people and finding out about those right people by going online to organisations like the RSPB, the Hawk and Owl Trust, the police and what have you.